Thank you for joining me. I'd just like to throw a few thoughts out with regards to business interruption. I've called it Groundhog Day on the basis that we never quite seem to learn our lessons and to change things. So I'll give some illustrations in that respect as we go through. So who am I? I'm a business interruption loss adjuster, essentially. I'm a dual qualified chartered accountant, chartered adjuster. I've presumed to write a number of books on the subject and contribute to press articles. So I run quite a lot of seminars each year and do my best to sort of bring on the next generation and to share the learning points. What I'd like to talk about is sums insured. So the Groundhog Day aspect is that there are issues with sums insured on both sides of the Atlantic and indeed beyond. And probably we're getting to the stage where we ought to be learning some lessons and perhaps making some changes. So I'll start by talking about a RIMS report issued in 2017. I'll contrast that or compare it with the UK position in 2017. In my capacity as chairman of the Chartered Institute of Loss Adjusters Business Interruption Group, we've done a number of surveys over the years, so I can give a context to the UK. And finally, I'd like to share some thoughts as to maybe things that we might be able to change. So in 2017, RIMS published a business interruption survey. And you'll see I've written there that everything is fantastic and the cover is constantly reviewed and is spot on. And obviously, if those had been the conclusions of the survey, then it would be great and I wouldn't be giving this talk now. So those are not the conclusions of the RIMS survey. I'll share some thoughts and observations as to the key findings. And what is interesting is how similar a lot of the issues are, regardless of how covers are written, both in UK and US. So everything is not fantastic. I'm sorry to destroy the tension at such an early stage. Everything is not fantastic and we probably should be able to improve. So in terms of key observations, that first observation, 68% of BI values reviewed annually. By reviewed, the report essentially was inviting people to interpret reviews, to compare with annual accounts and financial information. So if 32% of cases involve people where the insurance submission is not reconciled to the financial accounting situation, clearly that's a little bit of a worry and it opens up scope for misunderstanding. 41% of people struggle, but nevertheless complete the time element worksheets, which means that most people don't. It's very worrying that a lot of people don't take out BI cover. One of the issues of concern in UK post-COVID is whether or not the expectation that there was cover, where in fact there isn't any, if that undermines confidence so that people stop taking BI cover. The core BI cover is a very important, critically important part of risk management. And it would be a shame if issues such as notifiable disease, which in normal times sit at the fringe of cover, if they undermine the fundamental confidence in cover for such things as fire at factory premises. So hopefully people don't lose all confidence. Maximum indemnity period, MIP. So this is the period in months that your losses are insured for from the date of damage. 35% this survey found had 12 months. I would say in UK, 75% of people have 12 months cover. 12 months cover is practically useless in my experience. So 68% of people felt that the business interruption cover was suitable and would cover worst case disasters. When I am setting loss reserves or recommending reserves for insurers after fires, I would never assume that repairs will be completed sooner than 18 months, ever. And under a UK gross profit cover, you're then allowed to have a longer period to give you the opportunity to recover from or to build your customer base back up to where it would have been. So 12 months, I would suggest, is just too short. There was a legal case in the island of Jersey in the English Channel, and it's called the Café de Lec. It isn't a binding UK case, but it did make some points that I think everybody here would take as read. And that is that 12 months is hopeless. So this is a cafe. They had a fire in 2007. The reinstatement was still incomplete 4 years later. And essentially, the cafe was suing their brokers, saying, well, if we'd known you could have more than 12 months, we'd have had 3 years. The judge didn't believe that, but did accept they'd have had 2 years. So anybody watching this with a maximum indemnity period of less than 2 years, I would urge you, I'd implore you to have 2 years. If I was rich enough, I'd pay the second year for you. So in terms of the cover, 47% gross earnings, 32% gross profit. That still leaves 21% of people who don't know what the cover is, which again is slightly worrying. And in terms of challenges, that second point about information requested by insurers not available, there was a legal case in UK, Ted Baker v. AXA. The appeal was in 2017. I appeared in that as expert, and essentially the question was whether the loss adjuster's requests were reasonable. The finance director, his witness statement said that to answer the questions asked by the adjusters, it would have taken something like 17 pallet loads of paper. And I agreed with the expert on the other side to me that any request requiring 17 pallet loads of paper is not reasonable. So speaking for our part, as a business, we try to caveat requests by encouraging people to challenge us if questions and requests are inadvertently onerous, because it's not the intention. So that was US. In UK, so UK cover is available on what's called a declaration linked basis or a non-declaration linked basis. So most people are on declaration linked. There's no average, there's no co-insurance. Basically, you declare what you believe your gross profit is going to be, and you can have an uplift typically of up to 133.33% for unforeseen growth. And then at the end of the period, you declare what your gross profit actually was, and there's a premium adjustment. So there's no average clause. The problem that we find is 44% of cases, the declaration is too low. And if it's too low, the 244%, by the way, are the genuine article. They just happen to be the same. So a lot of people are getting it wrong. And if they get it wrong, it's more than half wrong. The point about the maximum indemnity periods I've made. So one of the issues is, where does this leave us where there are fundamentally low declarations? And the worst case scenario is that could constitute a breach of the duty of fair presentation that exists here for policyholders to make to the insurers. And the consequences of that potentially would be policy avoidance. So this is a big issue. And in terms of premium impact, it probably is costing insurers about £100 million a year in terms of underdeclared amounts. In terms of why policies are underdeclared, these are 4 surveys that the Chartered Institute of Loss Adjusters has carried out. And 2 questions. Number 1, how often is the percentage, is the declaration too low? Question 2, if it's too low, how inadequate is it? And those are startling figures. So ballpark, half and half. And you'll see 2017, it's consistent with previous surveys, that there are no great shocks. These are depth tests at a point in time, so I wouldn't read any trend into any of these figures. They're just evidencing that the inadequacy in the way people are arranging gross profit cover, let alone all the various extensions, is significant. Now, one of the other things we did in 2017 we hadn't done before is to try and find out why the declarations are too low. And I haven't the time or the space to summarize all of the reasons, but these are some of them. So essentially on a scale of 1 to 6, where number 1 is a big problem and number 6 isn't, these are just a range of causes. One of the biggest problems is that in insurance, there is a definition of gross profit. There is no definition of gross profit in either statute or audit standards in UK. So the mere fact that there is a definition confuses people. So an accountant will have a thing called gross profit in the annual accounts. We ask from an insurance perspective, what is your gross profit? And they could be forgiven for thinking that we mean the thing in their accounts called gross profit, but we don't. What we mean is something specifically defined in a policy. And Eurokey v Giles, which was a broker negligence case, the judge listed out a number of things that brokers should do in selling cover. The first point, paragraph 96, emphasised that the duty to get a sum insured right is with the policyholder. But the second point emphasised that where an everyday term or a common term such as gross profit is given a particular technical meaning called a state of art, then the duty is on the broker to explain that. So people not spotting that there is a different definition of gross profit, that's the single biggest thing. And I'll come back to a potential solution for that. I'm not going to read all of these bullet points out. Everybody can read, but it's interesting. I spend possibly a quarter of my time meeting policyholders with brokers before they have disasters, just to kind of have that conversation you'd normally have the day after a fire, before a fire, so there's still something you can do about it. And a lot of these things we can flush out in those conversations. And sometimes we find that instead of declaring the gross profit, what a company has done is estimated what it thinks its maximum loss is. So say that's a third of the gross profit. We come along as loss adjusters after a fire, and we suddenly say to insurers that the number needs to be trebled. And then we have problems and delay whilst these matters get considered. The penultimate point, a focus on price. When I do go and see people, invariably, everybody says to me, what we want to do is to get the cover right, and it's not about price. I suspect that's more because the people who are interested in spending time with me are aiming to get it right. And by definition, those who are focused on price, I guess, would say, well, what's the point in spending the afternoon talking about the cover with him? So there are myriad points, but two that slap me across the face are, first of all, this issue of the definition of gross profit. And secondly, in a UK form, if you insure for more than 12 months, so if you take my recommendation, you should have 2 or 3 years, what you're supposed to do is double or treble your annual gross profit. So if you forget to do that, you're down to a half or a third of where you should be. So it's quite easy to inadvertently find yourself on the wrong side of the fence. Now, in terms of what we might do about it, arcane terminology, avoiding that. I spent most of the day thus far liaising with an insurer who is looking to change the policy wordings and improve them. So avoiding even terms like gross profit. One answer is to stop calling it gross profit, maybe call it insurance profit, call it whatever you like, but just don't use the same term that appears in a set of accounts. We use phrases like uninsured working expenses, uninsured standing charges. By standing charges, we mean fixed costs. So avoiding some of this terminology would help, making it easier for people to sort of get the answer right. And time element worksheets, we saw earlier, 40% of people are doing the best, but is everybody really following what they mean and why they're necessary? We gave a talk in London some years back, and I invited a policyholder to speak. This was a business in the waste sector. They'd had a fire and they were significantly underinsured. They'd knocked off a lot of costs from turnover to get to gross profit, instead of keeping the list nice and short and making sure that only variable costs were deducted. And I said to the managing director, well, why did you not think it was strange when you were doing the calculation? And his answer to me was, I get 30 forms a year. No one explained to me this particular form was really important. I just filled it in. I didn't realise it would dictate the rate of recovery pence in the pound if I had a disaster. So, in fact, that was a talk on the waste sector, and the general seminar for the market was to discuss the tricky things about the waste sector. So I thought it would be an interesting balance to have somebody from the waste sector explain how tricky they all thought insurance was. So there've got to be things we can do to make this easier. I did say in my opening slide that I'm committed to sort of passing on the knowledge and helping people, but both those training within the insurance industry, but the policyholders also. And should you be interested, on the website for the Chartered Institute of Loss Adjusters, we have two books. They're both free of charge. You can buy physical copies of these. The book on the left, this was originally a study published in 2012, refreshed in May 2019, and it's meant to be accessible. And we discussed a range of things. The topics in that book were not topics that we set out to write about. We got a group of, I think it was about 50 people together, loss adjusters, underwriters, brokers, and everyone had a brainstorm about problems. And we applied two questions to that. Question number one, is this a common problem? Because there's no point in wasting time if it's fringe. And question two, is this a problem that can be remedied by changing a policy wording? If the answer is yes to both of those, it's in this book. So our challenge then was to just organise it into chapters. So we made recommendations such as, let's stop calling gross profit, because it confuses people. Let's maybe consider taking the onus of multiplying an annual number up for longer periods. Maybe insurers own that as a challenge rather than policyholders. So this is a book of practical challenges, and should you want a handy comparison of UK-US cover, Appendix 1 in the back of this sets out step by step the common differences between policy forms. And of course, wordings have varied massively. The UK FCA COVID test case has demonstrated that because of competition law, insurers don't adopt the same wording anymore, and nuances in words chosen can produce differences. So caveated with that point, the policy wordings recommendations tend to have application across a wide range of cover. The book on the right, I wrote with two others in the industry. That coincidentally was published last March, and probably just in time for COVID, really. A lot of people in insurance became involved in BI claims that perhaps hadn't before. So that is a basic introduction. There are fancy books that you can read about BI, but it's quite difficult to get into them without having a basic understanding. So the links are there for you. You can buy physical copies of both of these, the basic book from the CILA and the policy wordings book from the Insurance Institute of London. So if anyone is desperate for contact details to get hard copies, then drop me a line and I'll do my best to help you. Thanks for your time.